The fact that the Americans ran away 2 or 3 weeks ago is a small part of the failure. The failure was conceptual from the beginning.
Folks, as you know, social media censorship is growing. The best way to support our video work for Israel is to subscribe to our video newsletter on pulseofisrael.com and to share our videos. If you are already a subscriber, then thank you. Shalom, shalom, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland in the united and eternal capital of the Jewish people, the city of Jerusalem. Today, we are going to be talking to Professor Mordechai Kedar, expert on Islam and the Middle East, to understand what the disaster, the absolute disaster of the Biden-Harris-Obama, dare I say the truth, plan of pulling out of Afghanistan in such haste with a deadline that totally empowered the Taliban to just take over and embarrass America and leave U.S. Citizens and Afghanis who helped America stranded behind the enemy lines to be left to what the Taliban will do to them. So understanding from Dr. Kedar more about that situation and its implications on a geopolitical front and security front for Israel. So let's bring in Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Shalom,
Hi,
Dr. Kedar.
Nice to see you, Avi.
It is always a pleasure seeing you and always a pleasure hearing your really valuable insight. So I hope a lot of people tune in and listen to what you have to say. So I guess before asking about the direct or indirect implications on Israel, as we titled this, thanks to you, From Kabul to Jerusalem, what thoughts can you share with us about this this quick self-deadlined pullout of Afghanistan by the Biden administration?
Well, what happened during the last couple of weeks is only the culmination of the total failure of what happened in Afghanistan. Look, the United States and more countries invaded Afghanistan after the September 11, 2001 terror attacks by Al-Qaeda on New York, Washington, and more. And it took the Americans and their friends and allies 20 years to take the country from the Taliban, to pour the blood of thousands of American soldiers, injured soldiers, trillions of dollars, on equipment, weapons, hopes that things will come together, and only to find out 20 years later that the Taliban are ruling again this country, and it's the same Taliban. Of course, now they speak better English, and they know better how to approach the American and the world public opinion. But, in principle, they remain the same Taliban. Nothing really profoundly changed in them. So, when you look at the 20 years, what happened during the last couple of weeks is only a small part of the failure. The big failure was for 20 years trying to create, from nothing, a new state named Afghanistan, with the same name but different state, which was a total failure from the beginning. And to tell you the truth, more than 10 years ago, in 2010, I visited Washington, D.C., and I met with one of the advisors in the State Department who was dealing with Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I gave him the most simple idea what to do with Afghanistan, to divide Afghanistan to 11 ethnic states, just like what happened with the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia. These multi-ethnic states cannot function for a while. The Soviet Union was for 70 years, Yugoslavia more or less the same thing. And Afghanistan will fall apart because the Pashtuns and the Hazaris and the Uzbeks and the Tajikis and the Baluch and the other ethnic groups, they have nothing shared. Not the language, not the culture, not the food, not the clothing, nothing. They share nothing but the knowledge how to use the weapons against each other. So Afghanistan was from the beginning a failing state since its inception in the mid-19th century by the British and the Russians a little bit. So the Americans, instead of resuscitating this dead body politic named Afghanistan, should have done the right thing. And this idea I gave the State Department more than 10 years ago when I visited Washington, D.C. for a conference of ASMIA. So when I met with this advisor, I said, look, there is no Afghani nation. Not even one group is called Afghani. There are all others, but not even one group is called Afghani. So he says, what? What do you claim, that there is no Afghani nation? I said, no, there is no such one nation. You think like an American. They think like different people. They are not the same nation. So he says, you are racist, he tells me. And he actually walked out. And I left, and I gave a paper in the conference of ASMIA about tribalism in the Arab and the Islamic world as the problem and maybe the solution as well. Because look, in the Middle East, all the conglomerates of ethnic groups, of tribes, of religious groups and sectarian groups are failing states. It's Iraq, it's Syria, it is Yemen, Libya, Sudan, while only homogeneous countries, socially homogeneous countries, are successful countries. And this is the secret of success in the Middle East. Kuwait is one tribe, Al-Sabah. Qatar is one tribe, Al-Thani. Dubai is one tribe, Al-Maktoum. Abu Dhabi is one tribe, Al-Nihyan. So when you base a state on a consolidated, one single or leading group, the country is flourishing. Nobody fights anybody, and the state represents the people. The state rules and laws represents the traditions of the people. The state is legitimate. The leadership is legitimate. And this is how you have successful countries, whether with oil like Abu Dhabi or without oil like Dubai. While if you go to the conglomerates like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, these countries are failing state, whether without oil or with oil, like Libya and Iraq. So the oil and other natural resources do not create stability, social stability, and therefore they have no ability to establish a state on them. And this is why Americans are failing, because Americans think like Americans, that everybody can sit with the other one around the fire and sing Kumbaya together, because America is a country of migrants who came to America as individuals, or maximum they came as nuclear families, means father, mother, children, and they were actually brought to be together with the American melting pot, which is the school system, the university system, the higher education, the public sphere, the workplace, the army. Okay, so since you can see in the same unit, you could see people with different faces, different colors. This is how you create a nation out of individuals. And this is how America became a nation. But in the Middle East, people are not migrants. People here live forever. They live for thousands of years, developing hatred to each other because this is a desert. And in the desert, the other group is a threat on you because they want to take your water. And this is why you have to fight all the time on the water. And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of years of social and cultural heritage of the Middle East, which is based on hatred, based on competition, based on power. and based off you go away before I get you out of the world. And this is how the Middle East works. Americans don't get it. They don't understand. They think that if you give people money, they will love you, and they will sit with each other and sing Kumbaya together around the fire. It does not happen, because in the Middle East, the rules are totally different. They might thank you as long as you give them money. Once you stop giving the money, they will start hating you, because they view you as a Christian, and they are Muslims, as an infidel while they are believers, as you are permissive while they are traditional and conservatives, and they know exactly what happens with the girls in Europe, in America, and what happens with women. They see here and there in movies, and they view you as somebody who invaded their environment in order to de-educate them, means to corrupt them and to send your poison to their societies. And this is why they reject you and whoever cooperates with you, even if you try to create a democratic state. Democratic state sounds very good in Europe, in America, Australia, maybe in Israel as well. While here in the Middle East, it sounds very bad. Why? Democracy is freedom of speech. Since when do you have freedom of speech in Islamic societies? Can you speak against Islam? Freedom of women. Excuse me, in Afghanistan, freedom of women. Freedom of gays and lesbians. Excuse me, in Islamic societies. Freedom from religion. Because, you know, if you live in a democratic country, you don't need any religion. You can be an atheist, and it's okay. But in Middle East, if you announce that you left Islam, your punishment is very clear. They will behead you. So every component of democracy, which is viewed in the West as a basic component of democracy, is viewed here in the Middle East, in Islamic societies, especially so traditional and so conservative Islamic societies like Afghanistan, as a total heresy, as something which they definitely do not want even to get near. And this is totally rejected. But Americans think that if Afghani women, you know, go to the media, goes to school, go around in the streets without hair cover or face cover, as they are used in Afghanistan, so you bring modernism, you bring liberal, you bring liberty, you bring the pursuit of happiness, you know, the American dream to Afghanistan, and they will all lick your hands and maybe your feet as well. But this is not the situation. Of course, some people will love you because they are sick and tired of their traditions, especially women. But the whole society here is in a problem, because the change of values in societies have to take time. And I would say generations. You cannot, within 20 years, change the culture of people totally. It is just to take a U-turn with a train. You can take a U-turn with a small car, means one family, one person here and there. But you cannot make a U-turn with a train, Avi. And this is actually what the American expected, that the Afghani society will change, you know, rapidly from one pole, the Islamic, the traditional conservative pole, to the other pole of democracy with all the components of democracy. It cannot work. It takes dozens of years, if not centuries, in order to really change societies which do not go through a process of migration. If you break a society and you send it to exile, one person to here, one person to there, they are much easier to accept changes because they have to continue living. But if you come to them when they still dwell on their ground, on their soil, you cannot change them in such an easy way compared to migrants. So, and this is the American failure, because Americans think like Americans. If they see that America is comprised of people who came from Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, people who came from Africa, South America, Eastern Asia, wherever, you know, all the countries in the world send people to America, and you can see this on their faces and the colors and everything. And today they constitute the most powerful nation in the world, let's say. So, and Americans and the American industry thinks that if we can do it, why cannot they do it in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Syria or in Libya, wherever they are? No, they cannot do it. Because you guys in America did it because you came to America all in order to share the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. While those people who remain in their homelands, they don't have such a dream. Liberty to women. Okay, they don't share this this dream. So they view you as somebody who comes to corrupt them, to spread permissiveness. For them, it's totally rejected. And this is why whoever cooperated with you, including the Afghani army, were viewed as people who collaborate with a Satan, no less. They call you crusaders, because they compare America and Europe today to what happened in the 11th century, in the 12th century, you know, when the Crusaders came here to this Middle East and were kicked out eventually. So this is how, these are the roots of the failure. So the fact that the Americans ran away 2 or 3 weeks ago is a small part of the failure. The failure was conceptual from the beginning, by thinking that if you pour enough money and you bribe, yes, this is how they look at it, as bribery. If you bribe enough people to work with you and to cooperate with you, the people will all run after you and praise you in the streets. It does not work here in this region. And, the Americans found out that this is apparently what happened. Okay, so here we are. The question is, and you know what? There is another proof, Iraq. 2003, we are celebrating in 2 years, 20 years of that invasion as well. Saddam Hussein, who was a vicious, bloodthirsty dictator who definitely deserved to be sent to hell as soon as possible, he was removed. But instead of dividing Iraq to homogeneous tribal states, as I suggested already in those days, they continue to resuscitate this dead body politic named Iraq for a while. And now Iran took it over because it's dead. It cannot function. First, ISIS took parts of it, and now Iran, which is no less problematic compared to ISIS, because ISIS are the Sunni terrorists, while Iran are the Shia terrorists. On both arenas, the domestic arena, how they treat their people, okay? So they don't behead them in front of the cameras. They behead them without the cameras. This is the whole difference between Iran and ISIS. This is the whole difference. This Raisi, the now president of Iran, what did he do? Okay? He executed or sent people to be executed. Big numbers, thousands of Iranians. Okay, so are they better than ISIS? Only because they did it behind the scenes and not in front of the cameras? And this is the only difference between Iran and ISIS. So, since ISIS was defeated, because ISIS was frightening, because ISIS did what it did in front of the cameras, only in order to allow Iraq to fall victim to into the paws of the Iranian Shia terrorists. What is the difference? So this is another failure. No doubt, Iraq is the same failure as Afghanistan, without the pictures of people running on the runways along with the airplanes. This is the only difference between what happened in Afghanistan and what happened in Iraq. In principle, these were the same problem, the same mistakes being done both in Iraq and Afghanistan, because both countries could be divided to homogeneous units because both are conglomerates of homogeneous units. But in order to sanctify the borders which were drawn by the British 150 years ago, because the British only served their own interests, and now these borders are viewed as holy, holy, holy. Sanctus, sanctus, sanctus. Okay? This is the biggest mistake. Just like the borders of the Soviet Union, which were changed dramatically in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s, when these 15 countries, 15 states were established on the ruins of the Soviet Union. 7 countries were established on the ruins of Yugoslavia, changing dramatically the landscape and the borders. So why should the borders of Afghanistan and Iraq and some other countries as well be viewed as holy borders which nobody is allowed to touch? Why? What is the difference? Okay, so this is what I'm trying to convince my counterparts in America and Europe for years already. Stop looking at these countries as legitimate countries only because they were created by Britain, by France, by Spain, by Italy when it comes to the Libyan case or others. Start to look at the sociology and the ramifications which sociology has on the stability of the states. And, you know, the whole thing is written. But for this, you need to read, and everything is in English. I publish things in English. And this is why I do blame those American decision makers through the last 20 years who did not take the right advice from people who actually are aware of the situation, the social situation in these societies. Unfortunately, America usually, and the Europeans as well, stick to somebody who they view as the savior. It was Chalabi in Iraq. It was Karzai in Afghanistan, hoping or maybe thinking that the man is viewed in his society or in the local society as legitimate leader behind whom everybody will run in the streets and say, "Bi'oh biddam nifdik ya fulan," means we will redeem you with our souls and blood. Okay, but these people, the more they were in bed with the Americans, the less they were legitimate. And this is the problem. The more money the West is giving to any government in the East, the less it is viewed as legitimate. Look, even here in the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority today lives on contributions from many countries in the world, including America. The more money the Westerns are giving, the more the people hate the Western countries. And they will vote for Hamas, not because they share the ideology of Hamas, but they want to get rid of the PA, because the PA is viewed as an agent of the West, which the West and the Israelis created in order to change us, to educate us, and to bring different culture to rule over us. And this is why the PA is viewed as illegitimate. And if there were elections in the PA, Hamas would win, no doubt, because a minority of the people want really the Hamas ideology, but the majority of the people hate the PA, hate the Fatah movement who controls the PA. And they will vote to Hamas only, not because they love Hamas, but only to get rid of the Fatah as the movement. So what is the Israelis are doing? Are running forward in order to strengthen the PA, strengthen the Abu Mazen, strengthen the mechanisms of the Palestinian Authority in order
to bring everyone up to speed. What you're referring to is just now in the news, the Israeli government just gave over $500 million in a loan to the Palestinian Authority to help it. So that's what you're referring to.
But the more you support them, the more they are viewed as your messenger or your apostle of the Israelis, or the Zionists, and the Westerns, and this is why people hate them. Because they are viewed as illegitimate, because they are viewed as the long arm of Israel and the Western countries. And this is a paradox which people don't get it. The more you help them, the more they hate you. And this is the Middle East, unfortunately. But this is the Middle East.
So before I ask you about implications from Kabul to Jerusalem, right, in terms of implications specifically on foreign policy and geopolitics regarding Israel from this, I just want to give over like a short story that really crystallized for me the huge problem with Western diplomacy in general with regards to the Islamic world, the Middle East, and specifically America. I was in Columbia University for a graduate program in 2000, the year 2000, the same time that the Camp David Accords were taking place between Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat, the terrorist Palestinian Authority. And I remember sitting in class, and this is a huge conference hall, 200, 300 students, and I was in a conflict resolution course, and the conflict resolution that the professor was teaching about was about intractable conflicts around the world. How do you solve them? And he was going, in order to allow the two sides of an intractable conflict to be able to come together and compromise, well, you have to understand the other culture. And he would talk about, you have to know, like, do you use a fork? Do you not use a fork? Do you look in your eyes? Do you not look in your eyes? Do you look down? Do you talk first? Where do you stand? To that level of detail of understanding the opposite culture in order to then have respect and be able to come to compromise in an intractable conflict. And the professor started talking about how we're going to see peace in our time, the Camp David Accords, we're going to see peace between Israel and Palestine, yada, yada, yada. So in this whole course, I raised my hand to my professor of conflict resolution. And the professor called on me in front of 200, 300 people. And I said, Professor, according to everything you've been teaching to us this whole semester, the Camp David Accords are going to fail. And he got upset at me. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, everything you've spoken about is you have to understand the other culture in order to then come to compromise. And here the Camp David Accords is another implementation of Western philosophical peace process that's totally disconnected with the culture of the Middle East. And it's going to fail. He got so upset at me in front of the whole class. Well, it was the next week that it failed. Do you think he apologized to me? No, but to me, that's when I learned, okay, there's this Western colonialization of diplomacy, totally disconnected from actual culture and implementation and implications of the people they're trying to use that Western colonialized diplomacy on.
Yes, you know, I was once invited to give a class in NYU. Also in conflict resolution. It was a class of masters, and apparently this class actually dealt with the Middle East for some months. I was there like in February or March, means towards the end of the school year, and I gave them a lecture about the sources of problems in the Middle East, let alone Israel, means within the Middle East. And I talked about tribalism. Tribalism in our world today. Tribalism today. When I was speaking, one of the students raises his hand and said, hey, how come we never learned about this? We never heard about this word in the class, and we are already, past the half of the year. So the teacher who was sitting in the class, actually this question was against him. He says, no, we are going to get to this point eventually. So the guy says, no, but this is the basic reason of all the problems. We are talking about solving problems. Now I understand where the problems come from. We needed this class at the beginning of the year, not now. Avi, this was the last time which I was invited. Because this teacher did not even want to talk about this because it's not politically correct to talk about tribalism in the United States of America, because for Americans it might sound like the Red Indians or things like this, or like patronizing other peoples, which is not politically correct. Yet this is the source of most of the problems in the Middle East. So how can you deal with the Middle East while going around the main mine which blows up whenever you approach it here in the Middle East? You know, there are situations where political correctness is counterproductive. Just like, in medicine, if somebody, unfortunately, God forbid, has a cancer, you cannot go around and tell him, hey, you get a flu, only because he doesn't like to know, or you don't like him to know that he has cancer. Okay, there are limits to how much you can play with this political correctness issue. But apparently this teacher did not even want to deal with this issue of tribalism in his class because it's not politically correct. And here I am speaking about this straightforward, and the guy is angry at his teacher that he didn't start the school year with this class about tribalism, which will explain maybe not the way how you solve it, but at least where the problems come from. And this is, unfortunately, look, you don't see journalists talk about this in the Arab world and the Islamic world about tribalism or ethnicism. It's not nice to say that Arabs are killing Kurds only because Arabs hate Kurds and Kurds hate Arabs. It's not nice to say. You can say, yeah, people who live in Iraq are at odds with people who live in Turkey. This is something more modern, states and so forth. But the fact that the underlying issue is ethnic before it is political, people do not like to talk about this because you will be viewed as racist if you talk about these people and the characteristics of their struggles with each other. So,
and the sad irony is, like that State Department person and whoever else, the one who says, oh, it's racist to say they're not Afghani, it's racist to say they're not Iraqi, it's racist to say that they're from different tribes. They're the true racists because they are denying the real identity of the people that they're trying to solve. So even though they're saying they're afraid of racism and they don't want to be called racist, they're the real racists and the ones causing the problem by ignoring the actual ethnic identities of the people they're trying to work with.
Not only this, you actually increase the bloodshed, because if you stick them all together into one frame of government, you actually cause them to fight each other, because these people do not sit with each other to solve the problems in general. Only when they have no other choice. But as long as they have the forced choice, they would rather go to the rifle rather than to the negotiation desk. So this is unfortunately what happens. And this was the reason for the failure in Afghanistan, in Iraq. You know what? Maybe Somalia as well, because Somalia is also a very tribal country. So whenever you ignore sociology, any solution will blow up in your face. And this is sociology, values, all these things which are very, very hard to deal with. And this is actually what causes the Americans and the Europeans to deal with things which they know how, rather than to deal with things which they are not aware of, like religion and the ethnic traditions and so forth. Because both America and Europe actually are countries which try to turn their backs to the cultural background. They try to be modern, postmodern even, while ignoring look, in Europe, they erased the borders because to identify you as French or Polish or Hungarian or whatever, it is racism. You have to define yourself or present yourself as democratic, citizen of the world. This is the ideal according to the new age or postmodernism. Okay, so this, by the way, this is why they hate Israel, because Israel tries to preserve its Jewish identity, Jewish culture, and this is why in Europe the left sees Israel as a country which remained in the past, while the right wing are envious because we succeed. We succeed to keep our identity, while in Germany and in France, the right wing failed to preserve the nature, the culture of the countries, as you can see very easily.
Right.
So this is the conclusion which Israel should derive from what happened in Afghanistan is that a Palestinian state will turn not even a sliver of doubt, will turn into another Hamastan, because Hamas is actually the Taliban of the Palestinians. And they are viewed as legitimate, and every piece of land which Israel will leave will fall into the hands of the Palestinian Taliban, means Hamas. Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, and or another organization which will show up in the sea. So, and this is what we have to bear in mind. After all, Hamas took over the Palestinian parliament in January 2006. They won the elections to the parliament. And until this very day, since there were no free elections in the PA, since 2006, and I'm talking about 15 years, Hamas still keep the majority of the parliament. This is why Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, actually froze the parliament, and the parliament today has no role, although it was freely elected, because he doesn't want Hamas to tell him what to do. So this is how democratic the Palestinian state is. So this is what I expect to be again a total failure like the other countries. And so what is my solution? My solution is the Emirate solution. Means to create in the Palestinian Authority, on the ruins of the Palestinian Authority, 8 Emirates in the 8 cities, Arab cities in Judea and Samaria. El-Khalil means Hebron, Shechem means Nablus, Jenin, Jericho, Ramallah, Tulkarem and Kalkilia, in addition to Gaza, which is already a state, if you didn't notice, Avi. So they have borders there, every government component which they need. So Gaza and Hamas should be viewed as a state. Yes. And we have to find, the leaders. Well, we don't have to find them because they are there. The head of the families, the head of the clans in each of these towns, cities in Judea and Samaria should be the parliament. And this is actually how I give tribute to the tradition of the Middle East, to the social structures of the Middle East. I'm not trying to impose any ruler who will rule there for the Israelis or the Americans. And this is what we should do. The 8 Palestinian Emirates. And actually there is a website, Palestinian-Emirates.com. And I highly encourage all the audience here, or the viewers, to go into this website, Palestinian-Emirates.com, and to subscribe to it.
Right, and I just want to emphasize, and you could elaborate for those people who have not heard of this before, that basically you're saying, just like you told the State Department official 10 years ago that there is no such thing as Afghani people, they are different tribes, same thing here, there is no such thing as Palestinian people, they are all different tribes, and hence you want each tribe to be able to rule over itself in its own little emirate in its own city, because there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, and it's just a creation by the Western world to try to solve the conflict in our area, but it's not going to solve anything because it's ignoring the fact that there is no Palestinian people, and each area, each city is its own little tribe.
Right. And this is the source of the problems of the PA, because the PA today is viewed as illegitimate. The more it is on ruling the people in the state reject it. And this is why I came out already years ago. I think I even spoke about this in your dear channel, that the only solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is to establish 7 Palestinian Emirates in the Arab cities of Judea and Samaria, while the 8th one is in Gaza.
And on a geopolitical level, I mean, I know here we have this Biden administration that's going to continue its failed policies with regards to Afghanistan, Middle East, etc. Just back in the Obama administration, I think it was John Kerry who invited Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time to Afghanistan to say, look at our solution for Afghanistan. We want to do this solution for you in Judea and Samaria and Israel, and we'll protect.
They did, because the security forces of the PA, what they call the Dayton forces, were trained by Dayton.
U.S. General Dayton.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, you're saying that the solution they did for Afghanistan and training an Afghani army that has now basically come apart, and whether they joined the Taliban or not, is the same situation of the Palestinian Authority forces trained by America to be a army police force to, in a sense, enforce the peace. And you're saying, what are you talking about? They're not there to enforce the peace. They're there to end up turning their weapons on Israel and Jews and against each other.
Well, this is the situation. We have to understand it. We have to go along it rather than fighting it by establishing a state which will represent nobody.
And again, on a geopolitical level, now that this fiasco took place, what's your advice to this government and Naftali Bennett? He just had a meeting with President Biden. What would you be whispering in Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's ears right now in terms of moving forward on any diplomatic push or pressure from the Biden administration?
Well, he should tell President Biden that we Jews came to our forefathers' land, which is all the way from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River and some areas to the east of Jordan. 2.5 tribes remain there. This is our forefathers' land, and this is what we want and should build.
Okay, so then if there does come pressure for us to start a peace process with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, I think I just read a headline this morning that there was supposed to be a 4-way talk meeting in Cairo between Egyptian leaders, Palestinian Authority leaders, Jordanian leaders, and Israeli leaders. Now, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett just had an interview with the New York Times before his meeting with President Biden, saying straight out, he's not going to apply sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, which that was his plan. So it's very disappointing to hear him say that. But on the other hand, there's not going to be any peace talks. So why is there talks about there being talks between the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, Jordan, and Israel if they're not supposed to be any peace talks under his watch?
Look, everybody wants to show that he actually works with the Americans in order to get the American support. So politicians know very well what to do and how to do in order to draw the attention of Uncle Sam. And this is what happens. It's nothing but a PR action by Gantz. Of course, we have to pay for this PR. I'm afraid it will be a very hard currency. But what Netanyahu for many years tried to shove under the rag. But what we see today is that...
I didn't hear you. Netanyahu tried to what?
Netanyahu tried through the years to go around the Palestinian issue. And to say the truth, he actually succeeded. Because the Palestinian issue did not go forward almost in any area. as long as Netanyahu was there, because he knew very well how to negotiate with them and how to sit with them. Now you have a new group, pushed by the left and the Arabs to give whatever can be given, and even things which cannot be given, they are demanding to give. And here we are in the same problem with the Americans in Afghanistan. Now we are here, now in Judea and Samaria, and this is why the solution should be indifference. When it comes to America and Afghanistan, this is not their homeland. While we here in Israel are on our homeland. And this is a big difference.
Right. Dr. Kedar, it is always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you, Avi, for having me here. And let's hope for better times in the next year, which will start in less than a week.
Amen. And as we like to say, us Jews around the world, that we're about to celebrate our new year, our Rosh Hashanah. So Shana Tova, it should be a good, healthy year, Dr. Kedar. You and your growing family.
And you and your family as well, and all the viewers and the listeners.
Amen. Amen. Thanks again. All right, everybody. There you have it. You have Dr. Kedar, expert on Islam and the Middle East, throwing out such pearls of wisdom that if only our political leaders in America, in Europe, in Israel would listen to Dr. Kedar. Either I would want Dr. Kedar to be prime minister, or at least the right-hand advisor, whispering or talking loudly into the ear of our political echelon, giving them advice on how to move forward. We would have peaceful relations with our neighbors tomorrow. So my prayer is more and more politicians start listening to Dr. Kedar. Everyone, thanks for watching. You should all be have a good, healthy day, week, and if you're Jewish, a new year. Shalom, shalom. Signing off for another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.